coming, and I don't need to introduce you because we've managed to do it on the way, which was fantastic. But I would like to introduce Tommy Viljoen, Marta Ganco, and Gavin Cartwright, who have and Greg Janke on the phone. These four folks have actually pulled together this document, the Deloitte Australian Privacy Index 2015. It's our inaugural index, and we've done it today to coincide with the start of the Privacy Awareness Week, which runs from the 4th of May to the 9th of May, the 3rd of May to the 9th of May. And Tommy Viljoen is our senior partner in this space. He actually runs the sort of risk services for cyber in Australia for Deloitte, and has headed up this particular project. But the real brains behind it, I might say, is Miss Marta Ganco. And Marta's senior manager in our risk services practice, and she's had the able help of Gavin Cartwright, keeping us all on the straight and narrow, making sure we don't stray too far from the truth. Is that right, Gav? Tommy, let me turn over to you, and you can just let us know what it's all about, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I think the reason why we've issued this at the start of the Privacy Week is that privacy in the past has been treated very much as one of those things that organisations have to manage from a compliance perspective. And that has been fine whilst it has not mattered that much because of the lack of digitalisation and the lack of data. In this day and age, where we have got so many devices that we're using as individuals, where organisations are scrambling to digitise and provide new ways of contacting with us, that volume of information has grown exponentially. And if you start looking at those industries that are at the top of the list, you start seeing that they're no longer just complying, but they're trying to build trust. And you'll see a lot more discussion today about trust and transparency going hand in hand. So we really are seeing a new approach by organisations to dealing with privacy, certainly those that are leading the pack. And so it's moving from how do we preserve our brand to how do we enhance our brand. And so privacy is no longer just a compliance issue, it's a lever that organisations can pull to really build that trust with individuals, with the consumer. So we're very pleased to have this as the inaugural Privacy Index. We're hoping that as we roll this out over the years, so we'll see that bar going up across all industries, and we'd like to say that this has been able to allow organisations to benchmark and see how they're tracking. We have said to organisations that to get their involvement and to get the level of detail that we've got, that we will keep it anonymous. And so we have kept it at an industry level, and that way we can actually get a lot more information at a lot more granular level to be able to give the richness of information that we've got. Gavin's going to talk a little bit more shortly about how we went about it, but we've got over 1,000 consumers who have given their views on what they think of privacy. We've gone to 104 well-known brands in Australia and looked at various elements of what they do from a privacy perspective, and also what's being said about them. So it's a fairly comprehensive survey. And we've also conducted a qualitative survey with the actual individual organisations. So, I think I'll hand over to Gav now and just ask him to talk about some of the broader themes. I haven't gone, is anyone on the phone?
Yes, and Richard, you've just come on the phone. Are you hearing this well?
Hi Louise, yeah, I'm trying. It's a little bit soft, but a little bit faint, but I am getting it. Yeah.
Are you? Tommy has to throw his voice more. Right. I'm going to be giving him drama lessons soon. So that was Tommy Viljoen who was speaking there, and we're handing over to Gavin Cartwright now, who's going to actually talk us through the key themes.
Try and project.
Thank you,
Tommy. Thanks. Really, thanks. So key themes. For our first Privacy Index. So So around 3 key areas, transparency being the first, and probably our key one, hence the title of our report this year. Also regulatory change. There's been a big change that you may be aware of from last year, March 2014, a big change in privacy, but also the announcement that privacy breach notification is due to be coming, so the announcement said, and that is by the end of this year. And then governance, so organisations, how are they looking after privacy, how are they taking control, what actions are they taking? That's probably the third thing. So going on to transparency, so transparency builds trust. So that's one of the areas that seemed pretty clear in our minds when we got back certainly some of the consumer details. And within that consumer study, we had 20% of the organisations that came back said they had actually been notified of a privacy breach by a brand. Now, of that 20%, this is a really interesting one. We've got 34% who said they actually trusted that organisation more, which is a real good sort of confident statement around governance and actually telling organisations telling consumers what's going on and keeping them in the picture. And you can actually take that a step further, where that question we actually split into 3 of: do you trust them less, do you trust them more, or do you trust them the same? And actually, if you add up the same and trust them more, it was actually only about 27% had actually trusted them less. So 73% didn't actually have any less trust for that organisation now that they're notified. And that's a really big thing for organisations to know and realise when they tackle whether they should report a breach. And with mandatory breach potentially on the horizon, that's going to be a really important stat to understand for them in them actually making that breach. We also found that there was a tendency to and a bit of a disconnect between reality and consumers' perception. So whilst social media brands were not viewed favourably by consumers, the social media organisations themselves within the website actually tended to be more transparent and give more detail and offer a lot more layered descriptions about how they use that information they collect. Also, while banking and finance and insurance industries were perceived positively by consumers, other industries had generally better website transparency around how they again handled information. So a slight disconnect there between the two. And then, as I said, governance is a really important matter for how organisations are going to start to manage privacy going forward. And we've seen now really positively, and this follows on from the changes last year, that more than 75% of organisations now indicate they have a privacy officer role. And just over 50% are now starting to do privacy impact assessments. Now, privacy impact assessment is vital because as organisations go through change or start new projects that are going to impact the data they hold on consumers, a privacy impact assessment is all about them trying to understand up front, before they do that change, the impacts to that consumer. So are they still operating in the rules of how they collected that information in the first place? The understanding from the consumer of how their information is going to be used. That privacy impact assessment is there to help them understand, are they pushing that too far? Are they going beyond that creepy line? Or are they keeping it in the bounds of what a consumer would expect? And then, interestingly, a number of organisations are starting to do this as part of business as usual, which is great. So 60% we said have actually performed more than 5 assessments.
Fantastic, thanks, Gavin. And Richard, we're just moving on to slide 6 now, which gives you the image of the overall ranking.
Okay, Marta, do you want to take us through some of the, take us through this ranking slide and then some of the statistics that support that?
Sure. So, as part of the privacy index, we we looked at organisations across 11 industries, which are mentioned here. So as we can see from this slide, we've got government performing the best, followed by banking and finance and social media. And if we look at overall how those industries performed and where they did well, as Gavin was saying, the online policies and the cookie analysis that we did on each of those organisations' website assisted those organisations in getting a higher ranking. So if we move into the key statistics for each of the areas, what we basically did is assess each organisation across 4 different components. So we looked at the brand, the organisation themselves and their internal practices. We surveyed over 1,000 consumers, looking at how they perceive privacy within those across those 11 industries and specific brands. We looked at the website analysis, so looking at the online policy and also the cookies that those websites place on the devices of a consumer, and then also assess the media sentiment as well. So the brand, when we looked at each of the brands and their internal practices, that did not form part of the overall assessment for the index. And that is because we couldn't actually go in and verify what those organisations were doing. The largest component of the privacy index or the weighting came from the website analysis, and that's because that's where the reality is. That's where the privacy policy is online. That's where we could actually verify what cookies the organisation is placing on the consumer's device.
Can I just ask a question? To what extent are you comfortable with cookies? Do we need a bit of an explanation as to why we thought that was important?
You don't. And just before you do that, Hannah, are you on the line now? Have you got everything you need? Not yet, by the sound of things. Thanks.
Okay.
Over to you.
So there's a consumer angst at the moment around tracking, and in particular location tracking, behaviour online on websites, so that an organisation can target advertising at a consumer. So the reason we assess cookies and both first party and third party cookies is because they allow the organisation to be able to gauge a lot more about what their consumers need. So first party cookies, which we assessed, are cookies that the organisation places, that particular organisation places on that consumer's device and wants to gauge their consumers' behaviour. Third party cookies are cookies that are used from another organisation's website, so for example a social media website, to be able to gauge what that consumer is doing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So one cookie is placed on the website or on the device by the organisation itself, and the third party cookie is placed on the device by a third party organisation that organisation may be using. And both are tracking consumer behaviour.
And can you just explain some examples of these third parties? What types of groups and businesses that we're talking about?
Sure. So for example, a social media plugin is a perfect example. Advertising. So for example, if you choose a online web advertisers or ads to embed into your website, those are third party ads essentially that you're putting into your website.
They're the most common.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
they will download cookies on your device as you go down it.
And sorry, just as an aside, I use a thing called Ghostery on my computer. By the way, for those listening, Alex from iTWire, not part of Deloitte. I use a program called Ghostery on my computer. Ghost, E-R-Y. And it tells me all the cookies that are tried to get loaded by third parties, first and third parties, and allows me to block them or allow them on an individual granular basis. So maybe I don't want all the cookies, but I want Facebook Connect so I can chat. So I mean, if you're curious to see the cookies that are on your computer, this lets you know with incredible alarming detail.
Thanks for that.
There's a whole lot more.
They're not the only ones either. There's more than one, and I've got browsers for your phone and stuff as well. So if you really want to be private, get off the internet and use Ghostery.
So the other dimension of cookies that we assessed were persistent and session cookies as well. So session cookies are on that person's device for the point in time that that person has that web browser open. And persistent cookies are on the device until that cookie expires. Yeah, so that also formed part of our analysis. So as you can see, that's why that formed a greater weighting for our index, because those are the sorts of things that we could, like you were saying, giving the example of ghostery, we can actually assess that and check that. So
Honestly, you're going to go on and explain why that's important, how you're able to work out privacy from those, extrapolate privacy from the types of cookies, or is it not getting ahead?
So
yeah.
we'll show you some of the information that comes through, but the concept is that if you've got a cookie that is only for that session, it's far less invasive from a privacy perspective than a cookie that is persistent and lasts for 100 years.
Right, so you're going to extrapolate that companies that use the session-only cookies are respecting privacy more than the ones that have persistent cookies, or third parties that put.
So what we did was we took a combination of those that, because we actually went onto the website, downloaded the cookies, analysed them, and those that had mostly persistent, we gave a much higher rating to than those that had, that the session found, much higher rating than those that were persistent and had a long life, because some of these can have a very long life.
Importantly, we also took into account, going back to the transparency thing, if they made it clear in their policy or as part of their product disclosure statement around privacy that they did use cookies to help you so that you didn't need to do X next time, or to help that experience, and they were transparent that they used them and potentially used other third parties, that was taken into account in our score.
And that's Gavin, Richard and Hannah.
and there's a positive message coming out from the websites as well, where we have 74% of organisations that are actually giving their consumers online information about these cookies and how to remove them. But to give another example, one of the statistics we were able to pull out is some organisations are placing cookies on consumers' devices for up to 135 years. So what that is actually saying is that consumer, if they had that device for 135 years, that is how long they're being tracked for.
It's not a company that starts with F and ends with K, is it? Facebook.
we don't know what that company might possibly be.
I wasn't thinking of the other one until I said it. And I'm like, that's what that could also be.
Martha, should I go back to just the anxiety that Australian consumers have about what it is?
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess looking at the consumer survey that we conducted, we asked consumers what are the things that they're most concerned about in relation to privacy and what information they find sensitive. So what consumers responded was that 67% of consumers responded that credit card details was the most important piece of personal information that they held, followed by their passport number and driver's license number. And if we look at the ranking of industries, so the 11 industries and who came out on top, being government and banking and finance, those key pieces of information came out from those industries. The other thing that we found was that 1 in 3 organisations have had a privacy issues relating to personal information that they hold, and of that third, 40% of consumers had either complained to or about that organisation relating to privacy. So what we're seeing here is an increase in the amount of privacy complaints, and that could be due to the changes, the regulatory changes that came through in March 2014 last year, which is encouraging organisations both to provide contact details on their websites and encouraging consumers to voice their concerns.
And what
to
would be
organisations.
a typical complaint made to a company when you say like raising a privacy issue? Like, what would be a typical one?
So it could be, for example, that a consumer has received a bill in the wrong name, or it could be that they've noticed, they've Googled their name, or they found their name on a search result or a website that they weren't expecting to. That's probably one of the most common ones.
And both men and women complained equally, it looks like.
Both men and women.
And us
Yes.
older fogies complain more.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. So you said 1/3 had companies or organisations had privacy issues, which meant of difference. Is that 40% of that 1/3? So it's 40%, 33%. So
Yes.
it's not a whole lot.
Yes.
Sorry, just on something that Tommy was talking about before. I think you were saying the breach notification is due to be coming by the end of the year, and then you said mandatory breach potentially on the horizon. Is it coming, or I mean, is there a definite date, or do we not know yet? Because I know, I mean, obviously we have it in the US.
So there's been an announcement about 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The government announced
No idea
this
if
was
never know.
due to be happening by the end of the year.
Yeah.
Now we can't say that's
Definite,
happening.
yeah. Well, it's the
because-
government, you can't say anything's definite.
But they have made that announcement.
Okay.
And it's tried to go through for the last, when did it first try and go through Parliament, Tom?
About 18 months ago.
Even up after.
Yeah, well, it's been in debate for a
So
while.
it's been coming for a while, but they have now made this announcement. But yeah, us saying horizon and not quite saying this definitely is that, you know.
Well, it's going to get some
They've
publicity
announced.
today, that's for sure. So.
That's right. And is it just the UK has mandatory, and many of the states in the States?
The
US.
US.
So the US has it on, there's many states, it's still not national in the US, right?
It is
They're looking
federal.
to go to the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is federal for some pieces of information such as health, consumer credit information.
Of course, it makes us wonder which Australian organisations have been breached that we simply never heard about.
Well, look, you know, you see that in the US. There's a lot of breaches. You know, most of the reports out there about big US breaches, and we all see those. Yeah, you know, one of our colleagues has said before is, you know, that there's two sorts of organisations: those who've been breached and those
And haven't reported.
who don't know they've been breached.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And you know, the US are generally slightly more mature from a technology and security perspective, and so that comes from that as well. In terms of they've got the technologies to monitor and to find out breaches, probably slightly far ahead of where we are currently, and other countries, quite frankly. Plus, they have got this breach notification ruling in a number of their states, so it comes from there. So absolutely, there will be other breaches here and elsewhere.
Sure. And just a final question, was that the Department of Communications that announced that? I just want to look now for their press release.
Obviously, it's interesting we all missed it.
I'll
Obviously.
double check that.
It'd be nice to point to it so people
Yeah,
can...
we did have that link. You always ask that question. And you
I
sent it
did,
to
but
us.
I didn't include it in the release, but I
No.
probably got it. So we can let you know.
Sure.
Smarter did the research.
There was the announcement, but we've subsequently looked at, because you can see what legislation's coming up, and we don't
Yeah.
see any at this stage, but there is a link to that
So it
communication.
came out of the data retention bill.
Yep.
There was a point out of that mandatory data breach notifications would be in by the end of the year. But I know that I've gone to quite a few talks with the Privacy Commissioner there, and he doesn't say too much about that at all. So yeah, so that's until it's in, we don't really know.
Across the board, or is that just for retained metadata?
So,
That's a question from Leon, Richard.
Sorry, Leon from ZDNet.
so the legislation has gone through,
Yeah.
but pertains specifically to the telco industry. But one of the statements made during that process was they would look at all breach notification. But it was I'm just not sure if it was a passing comment or not. I can get back to you with that.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned, you know, I think about that, yes, you couldn't just have one industry having breach notification, none of the others. That's all I remember hearing. It's Bernard Kellerman too, I'm not at Deloitte, for Deloitte.
Okay.
Yep, so we spoke a little bit about cookies before. So from a website perspective, social media ranked the highest in terms of the transparency of information that it provides, the educational materials such as videos that are available on the websites, educating consumers around different settings that they can use to protect their privacy. Social media also, interestingly enough, had the least amount of third-party cookies that they place on consumers' devices. And then finally, from a media sentiment perspective, so this was the area that had the lowest weighting. We had more than 42% of the organisations that we assessed having privacy-related coverage in mainstream and online media. And some of the key themes that we saw coming through were around regulatory change, and that's understandable because we had the Privacy Act changes in March 2012, and we've also had a lot of discussion around it with the data retention bill going through. A lot of privacy policy changes, so the media is picking up on organisations that are changing their policies in a positive way, which is great as well, and data breaches from organisations.
With these stats, did you do any surveying on how many consumers actually read any of these privacy policies and took any notice of them? They might be really transparent, but I mean, for a lot of people it's just guff that they would never read. It's like you get a lot of European websites now at the top it says, oh, this site uses cookies, you know, click here to say that you agree. It's like, just click here to get rid of the stupid box taking up 1 centimetre of my browser. And then social media uses the least number of third-party cookies, but wouldn't they use the least number of cookies but the most powerful cookies, you know, with these ridiculous time frames? And I mean, we know Facebook tracks people even if they're not logged into Facebook. They seem to have super cookies, and we remember Google had some sort of incredible cookie that breached, you know, Safari's don't track me type stuff. It was like some sort of super session cookie that they got in trouble for. And then it says 74% of organisations provide consumers with info on cookies and how to remove them. So again, did anyone actually like use Ghostery like me, or just go through the? I know that news.com.au has a thing about relevant advertising. You can click on it and say I want all that off, which I've done. But how many people do that? I would wager hardly anybody.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, did we ask consumers whether they read the terms and conditions or privacy policies? That wasn't a question that we asked. In terms of the methodology that we use to determine what information is being stored on consumers' devices by these cookies, we actually use the same methodology that the European Union used. So their Article 29 working group had a methodology that they used to assess organisations, drawing first-party, third-party cookies, including the number of years, expiration dates. So we were able to use the same methodology or replicate that methodology that the European Union used to draw that information out.
But also, Alex, perhaps to also answer your question, on page 2 of the release, the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, since last year's changes, has received 14,064 privacy inquiries, and it's received 4,016 privacy complaints, which is a 43% increase on the previous 12 months. And so you can see that the changes of those principles that they instituted in March of last year has really upped the ante on awareness for people, and that's the point of all of this, and that's the point of this week, actually. So it might not have been specific to the question of cookies, but it certainly is specific to the question of awareness.
And I think to add to, there's no doubt that the issue that social media has had in the past around privacy has led them to being much more transparent, to providing much more education, So I think there's been a lot of activity in that sector to try and remediate and get on the front foot.
I'm just always reminded of Henry Ford's statement that if the American people knew how the banking system really worked, there'd be a revolution before lunchtime, and I think there's something similar with the way privacy works. But, yeah.
Well, everybody's working on it, aren't they?
That's right.
Shall we kick to the next pictures, which is the consumer sentiment analysis?
Sure. So I guess this is a graphical representation of some of the key insights that we drew from the consumer survey. So we're looking at the top 3 most trusted industries that were identified by consumers. So we've got banking and finance there, government and hospitals as well. We also, we mentioned before, credit card, passport and driver's license information being the most sensitive types of information that consumers hold. In terms of the responses to organisations that the public trust the least with personal data, these were quite interesting statistics. So 10% of the public actually said that they did not trust anyone. 26% had never used the organisation that they did not trust. So that's a powerful message there, where consumers may not have used the organisation and they've already formed a judgment about them.
And it goes to Gavin's earlier point about this disconnect between perception and reality a little, doesn't it?
Mm. And then 52% of consumers indicated that they weren't current customers of the organisations that they didn't trust. So they're quite interesting insights there in terms of consumers that are not even interacting with an organisation already forming a perception around them.
What about the other 12%?
Sorry?
The other 12%. Did I add it up wrong?
Oh, okay, so this is
You used to work for the tax office.
fair enough, it's not a pie chart, was what I was about to say.
Yeah, these are different populations.
Different questions and different insights from different
Okay, so that could be the same.
Yeah. So I guess the message coming out from the consumer survey is, how can organisations build trust through transparency to actually retain their customers?
Or attract them.
Yeah. So with the survey that we conducted with the brands, we found that most organisations have an internal privacy policy. So most organisations have compulsory training for their employees. But a lot of this training is done less than annually in most organisations. So maybe when an employee joins, it's done once and then it's not done again. And then over 2/3 of organisations have a data breach policy. So what we can see here is that organisations are complying with the Privacy Act, but is that, as Tommy was saying at the start, is that enough? So what can organisations do to manage privacy concerns around the technology developments that are occurring at the moment? Looking at the media sentiment analysis, so I spoke about this a little bit before. So we had the top 3 industries that performed in media sentiment analysis were insurance, health and fitness, and travel and transport. And I guess a key message for organisations here is, how can organisations build a positive media presence around privacy?
And travel and transport's quite comprehensive, isn't it? It includes hotels, rail, taxis.
Yep. So
delivery.
Yep. Airlines.
Thank you.
And finally, looking at the website analysis. So the message for organisations here to consumers is, do consumers know how their information is being used? So do they know what's being collected, how it's being used, who it's going to? So the key, looking more at the website and how consumers interact with the website, we found that most organisations have mandatory password strength rules, so 46% of them. And some perform exceptionally well by having two-factor authentication. So they're putting those additional measures in place to protect their consumers' information.
And do you know which industries were good at this?
So that was banking and
Banking.
finance.
Ah.
So, and 19% of organisations didn't have any password strength rules at all.
So can we have the corresponding results for whether it's hospitals, government or media? The information here for banking and finance we'd like to have.
I think it's in here, in the document itself.
Excellent.
So we've got the rank for each of the components that we assess. We've got a ranking of all of the industries.
And at the back you've got detailed information there. Thank you. And future trends, Gavin.
Okay, all right. So we can ask some questions on some of the stats afterwards, but we wanted to also focus on what are going to be the areas of focus needed around privacy in the coming months. And we tried to come up with 3 or 4 areas. I think there's 4 in total. So firstly, informing customers around breaches. We've already mentioned a bit of this, but what does that mean for organisations? And linking back to our earlier theme of governance, one thing that I've certainly observed is, organisations, as Marta sort of pointed to, have had to change because of last year's Privacy Act changes. So they've done that, but a big issue is, do they know where all of that consumer data actually is? Right? So you can put in all these controls and policies, but you need to know where your data is. It's essential. So the first point really is getting organisations to understand that, map out, do some data discovery, and really understand where that data is and how it's being used by their organisation. And where is it being held? Who can access it is vitally important. Do all those people need to access that information and have access? And it probably depends on the sensitivity of that data being held, but that again is an important point. And then sort of linking back to that point around vigilance and monitoring of activity, do organisations know when there's potentially suspicious activity that's about to happen or has happened, so that they can act quickly, they can potentially inform who they need to internally to start off their investigation, but importantly so they can tell consumers before consumers find out in other ways. So I think, again, that going back to that governance point, that there's going to be those 3 points that are going to be very key to organisations really getting on top of that.
And governance is a big deal for the Privacy Commissioner, I understand, isn't it? Right?
Absolutely. And it falls into the very first Australian Privacy Principle, number 1, talks about the methods, the processes and procedures that organisations should have to maintain privacy. And it's all about governance and having good sort of track of where your information is. The next one is a real sort of ethical dilemma around big data versus consumer ethics. So a couple of different areas that this focuses on. And really, organisations are trying to use this information. They're getting huge amounts of this information that they want to use, and really to create opportunity for themselves, but also give the consumer a more sort of richer experience with them, which I think, if done in the right way, most consumers would appreciate and really benefit from as well. But the important thing around ethical considerations is, is the organisation absolutely transparent about what they do? You gave your information because of you were buying X or you were signing up to something else. Do the two link? And that's really important to understand. And there's another point in there that our organisations, they've got the opportunity to do something with that data, but does it cross that line? Does it sort of go beyond what I would expect as a consumer, what we would expect as a consumer? It's important to think about that. And also that we've certainly seen how organisations are linking that back to their own strategies and their visions. If they're set out to be the most trusted, or someone where they take consumers, customers are first, or all of those linked to they should be doing this sort of stuff. So, one of the questions to ask, as I put in there, is would an individual reasonably expect you to do that? And hopefully organisations will take from this, and potentially are already doing this. They're asking themselves that question before they're doing that sort of analysis on that data.
And slide 13, Rob.
Yep. So on to the next slide. Personalisation links right into that. So that is about personalising that online experience that users have, doing that in a way that helps, but doesn't cross that, as I said earlier, that creepy line about going too far. And the next point down is about privacy compliance to privacy by design. So rather than it's all about policies and sort of ticking a box, we need to shift so that privacy is at the start of each project, of each change around personal information. And there's a concept that we haven't brought this in. It's been mentioned by the governor. It's also mentioned in what's the Canadian privacy by design? What's the Canadian practice or consortium?
ICO.
Canadian
Information
ICO.
Office.
So privacy by design isn't a new concept, but what it does do is quite straightforward, right? It's building privacy in, it's embedding it from the start, so that you don't have this issue where they get to the end of a project and they suddenly realise they're exposing everyone's details online, and somehow they thought that was a good idea because it brings great opportunity or benefit, but actually it didn't consider the impact on the consumer. So privacy compliance through privacy by design is just making sure that awareness is across all individuals around doing the right thing around personal data. And then getting the basics right. I mean, this is something we certainly, and Tommy spoke about getting the basics right from a security point of view, but from a privacy point of view that includes security, it's something that organisations really need to do. You look at a lot of the data breaches have been down to accidental loss that you're never going to completely wipe out, but certainly you can do a lot around awareness and staff training for that. Communications being sent to the wrong person, missing basic security controls, and lacking training of awareness. Those basics need to be right, and you're never going to stamp out every single one, but you can drastically improve your odds on that, which I think is important. And again, it really links into that last point of being in a position to be able to justify what you have done. So have you gone out and made sure you've got the basics right? Do you know if a breach happens in your organisation that you've done what is reasonable to make sure you can potentially spot it first? And so doing those things allows you to stand up that we did what was reasonable, and that's the sort of expectations that are being put on organisations, is to do what is reasonable.
Gavin, we talk about what is reasonable. I know Tommy's talked about anticipating what might be coming as opposed to just building walls and things like that. Is anticipating regarded as reasonable, or is that the extra mile?
Yeah, so it's a difficult one, and the Information Commissioner has released guidance on what is reasonable. So there is they're not that granular, but it does give you a picture of the sort of things that you need to be thinking about. So that is there. But it's taking a by design approach. So rather than just ticking a box that yes, we've got that there, so that's enough. It's about thinking, well, would that stand up? Would just me putting a password that has no complexity there stand up if someone was able to get into that? Would consumers expect more? So I think it's just about challenging yourself if the worst case scenario did happen, and then just going back, what controls did you put in place to try and prevent that? So yes, anticipating it, but probably through that method. And then look, I put this in both in the report.
This is the quote that did on.
And then Louise and I sort of spoke about it further, but for me it's probably more from the Spider-Man movie than its original. But with great power comes great responsibility. And linking that to privacy, I think, is fairly easy to do, and it links fairly well. So it's, the power is data at the minute. So big data, you would have heard a lot of cloud, which is sucking up everyone's data into the cloud. They all want it. Organisations have got great potential to personalise users' experience, as I've said. So there's that great power. But organisations have got to then be more responsible for it. And so they've got to be aware where it is, and increasingly they've got to keep the consumer informed. So informed where, in terms of how they're using it, what they're going to do, but also informed if there's going to be changes to that data. And I mean changes in terms of they're going to start moving their data offshore, so consumers would want to know that, certainly, but also changes in terms of there's also been an issue, there's been an incident, or there's been a potential incident, giving that consumer the knowledge that their data could now be out there, that they never wanted because of it. So I think it links well with both of those, and is a good way to think about it.
Is it possible at all to put like a dollar figure on the worth of big data now? I mean, talk about big food or big pharma, I think various terms as well. But when we say big data, we know there are a lot of transactions and sales going on of information. Are there any estimates floating around, or have you attempted to?
I think our Access Economics, the Deloitte Access Economics, has helped organisations such as Google try and put a value on digital. So it might not be big data, but
So the internet, $76 billion, up from $46 billion only 3 years ago.
so that's the value to the Australian economy
That's it.
of digital.
So globally, it
All about
trillions.
data. Oh yeah.
Oh
absolutely.
yeah, this is Australia.
And of course, with Google, you've got the whole "don't be evil" and get right up to the creepy line, but don't cross it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have some conflicting role modelling there from Google.
The purpose of this index is really to help industries that are maybe lagging understand what is it that they can do. Because if they are going to take advantage of building really strong relationships with their customers, they're going to have to reconsider how they do their price. And that they're going to have to be much more transparent, and in certain industries they're going to have to reduce the amount of time they hold that information, or at least provide information, analysis on what they're doing with that information. Otherwise you're not going to build trust. So I think the purpose here is for those industries who are lower on the list, for example on website analysis, they can go and have a look at, well, what did organizations that were higher up do well? So they can start considering what are the activities they've got to undertake to try and do better.
Why do you think, say, the media industry is right at the very bottom? I think it's ranked 11, especially when media organisations are trying to build trust through their products and services and so forth, and we're the media here as well. So I just want to quickly, why is it 11?
I felt like that was going to be a top 10, but you just sneaked that in.
Yeah. Rub it in our face.
Well, I mean, if I take media for website analysis as an example, how transparent are the policies? How much information is the media giving about where their data is being held? How many cookies are they putting on compared to other industries? How long are those cookies alive for? So those are all things just on website analysis that media can do a whole lot better. But I don't think it's been a focus of media. I mean, media fairly, it's been a tumultuous change for media to get onto digital. And it's been, I think they've had to jump a lot quicker than they probably would have liked to. And maybe things like privacy and that sort of thing weren't considered at design time, where Gavin has been talking about. So these are the sort of things that media probably need to go back and have a look at if they're going to try and build that trust with organisations.
So the speed of change in this digital era and media's trying to scramble and survive, that probably is seeing privacy concerns slightly,
Probably at the lower end of the list.
Yeah,
survival's probably been higher.
Yeah.
Whereas banking and finance absolutely had to get it right
They've
from
been
the
on that
start.
journey for decades.
Could I ask you, so the weighting, how important are the cookies? What sort of, it's probably here, what weighting do your cookie analysis have in that
So
ranking?
website transparency, clarity, education, and cookies, which are all part of the website analysis, contributed 55%.
And what was the other 40?
So the consumer was 30%, and the what was the last one?
The media sentiment
Media
formed
sentiment was 15%.
Media sentiment, which is what the analysis of what happened.
Analysis of what's been in the media.
If you've had breaches,
That's what I was going to ask. So that means that if you had breaches reported for certain industries but not others, that would push them up higher. In other words,
They would be pushed down the list.
Well, it's a positive and negative sentiment.
Yeah. So I'm trying to work out. It sort of goes to also towards industries who are better at covering up any breaches or not making.
Well,
That sort of. I mean,
that would give that would. They may not be in the media as much, but if there's low transparency and they're collecting a lot of information and the cookies are have longevity, they would lose. They would go down the rankings from that perspective.
Okay, I'll talk about this afterwards. I'll tell you where I'm heading with that, but
Okay.
Certainly, I've noticed looking at various media sites that there's a huge list of cookies, all trying to see how much time people spend on articles and where they're going and what they're doing, and it's just incredible. You know?
And that's reflected by the results.
And usually that's nothing to do with the journalists.
That's right.
It's the web designers who are doing it, trying to figure all this stuff out.
And the advertising that's going
Yeah,
on.
all the advertising.
Can I just ask on slide 9, one of the key messages, what can organisations do to manage privacy concerns amidst current technology developments? Could you expand on what the answer to that question is a little bit for me, please?
Did you say 9?
9, yeah. So that second kind of key message there, that question, I was wondering if you could sort of expand on what the answer to it is.
What can organisations do to manage privacy concerns amidst the current technology development?
Yeah.
So I guess organisations at the moment are scrambling to innovate. There's so much technology that's out there, cloud software, social media sites appearing pretty much on a monthly basis, and they're all trying to adopt to compete with their competitors, obviously. But I guess that time to market or to take that new product or that new service out to their consumers, one thing that also needs to be considered, as Gavin was mentioned, is making sure that the privacy concerns of those consumers have been considered upfront before that service or product is released out to market. So, for example, if for example an organisation is going to start storing their consumers' data in cloud software in an overseas country, has that been mentioned in the privacy policy? Do consumers actually know that is going to occur?
So, Marta, an example would be, mobile apps would be a great example of this. So the need to just get it out there quickly, and even not care if it's got a few bugs in, just to get it out there. Those bugs could potentially be, as well as a security issue, they could be a privacy issue, whereby it seemed great at the time because they're going to show people some information about browsing habits, or but they haven't fully thought through that. Actually, if you go back a couple of times in a certain sequence, you can suddenly see the last person who visited the site, or and it's just that speed to market that people are really hot on from an innovative perspective, that not always sweeps up the privacy by design method.
Sure. And the other question I wanted to ask, and that may be linked to this question, I mean, what's the key message to firms' risk managers specifically? I mean, what do they need to be doing across privacy?
There's a really easy one at first. So the first is personal information involved in this project, in this business change? That's the first one.
So that's what the risk managers need to be asking.
Correct.
Anyway, yeah. Okay.
So that's the first sort of qualification question, and then from there, it is a case of, well, what type of personal information, how much personal information? It's quantifying the volume of that risk. Is this project internal only, with a really small user set, or is it a project that's going to put in place an online portal where consumer information could be accessed via the internet? And So from qualifying is personal information, you sort of move along and you start working out what is that, the size of this risk. And that's probably the best way to think about it.
With my risk manager hat on, that solves the go forward. The challenge is what's happened to date, because these projects are not happening in a way that is the normal channels. So your IT chop doesn't always know what's going on from a business perspective, and that's what's happening. You know, we're seeing that on a daily basis. So from a risk management perspective, doing a bit of an inventory across the organisation of where is the private data, where is it being held, how is it being used. We're seeing a lot of organisations undertaking those sort of inventory assessments of private data to catch up with the rest of the organisation.
And then that choke point where you could filter sort of business change and projects through a sort of project management office type function is quite an easy one in terms of having that as a stage gate, a checkpoint. But obviously the risk currently that would also be under Tommy's risk hat is cloud. So the cloud is going through, sometimes through that same avenue, because it's IT related, but a lot of the time those cloud offerings, again, they're a new offering, it would solve a problem, are being signed up to by the business, and sort of ignoring that IT or potentially even that project management office process. And therefore it's really important the awareness is amongst everyone, not just relying on that funnel to capture any personal information changes. That you know, if someone's going to go and procure a cloud service themselves, they understand that they've still got to take into account those privacy requirements.
So with these results in mind, what's your message to consumers who are tending or trying to be more savvy and careful, obviously, like things like, because you've provided information about brands and companies, organisations, what they're doing, and then, you know, at the sort of legislative level as well. But right now, knowing this, what can consumers do to maybe protect themselves? And I think one of the things is, you know, to ask questions, to, complaints make a difference if they speak out in a large volume of complaints in one area, perhaps. Just out of all this, what's your message to consumers who want to be savvier and more careful?
That's a good question. Marta, do you want to go first on that one?
Sure. So I guess from a consumer perspective, we provide a lot of sensitive information to organisations. So we care about that information because it's close to our hearts. And the most common type of information that we probably provide are our credit card details, which consumers are finding is most sensitive to them. So my message to consumers would be, yes, you may not read the privacy policy, and it may just be a tick in a box, but taking interest in where that information is going. Ask questions to the organisation. If you're not comfortable with something, make a complaint or raise that concern with the organisation. I guess the more consumers start to speak out, the greater awareness organisations are going to have that consumers care about privacy of their information.
And with some of the findings about cookies as well, and you mentioned like ghostry, you don't want to instill fear in people, but what's the clever thing to do? Should they be looking at these cookie disabling, add-ons and so forth, or do you think that sometimes in some circumstances it's overkill?
I think it comes down to personal decisions and how comfortable you are with your information being tracked, and some people are very comfortable. And the younger generations seem to find it more acceptable than the older generation. So that's where I think social media, if you go onto those sites and you look at the videos, they do show you how to stop that tracking from happening. And I think as individuals, that's actually a good education because you can actually take power back. I certainly am quite concerned about some of the privacy things, aspects of what I want known and not known, and therefore I will limit what sites I will go onto. I will ensure that on certain of the social media sites I've set the right settings, and some of those settings have to be set every time they get updated, so it's the challenge. So if you are concerned about privacy, you can do a lot to maintain it, as you no doubt do.
Sure. Well, I would ask. I mean, you could do things like get a prepaid credit card or use PayPal. I mean, if you don't want to give your credit card details, don't.
Yeah.
And then with the ghostery, the only thing that I would caution there is that if you disable certain cookies, then you disable certain functionalities of websites. So you might not have Facebook Connect running, or discussion groups, or live fire, or there's a few of them. But the good thing about ghostery and others is that you can granularly turn them on and turn them off. And so maybe most of the time you want it off, but if there's something you want to comment about or see what the comments are, then you can temporarily turn it back on. But suddenly you start breaking the web the way that you know it. But I would ask, with the young people who are so free with privacy, surely they're simply because they're just unaware. I mean, they never went through Great Depressions. They never went through concentration camps with Nazis. I mean, stuff like that. Obviously, I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but even so, young people just don't know. If they knew, maybe they'd be a bit more concerned about it.
And Alex, that's the one of the themes of this National Privacy Awareness Week, which is exactly that, to help educate young people and young adults in particular as to the sorts of things they can do to protect themselves. I understand.
What was internet cafes are now probably more popular. Airport lounges have machines that you can use. I know generally people have their own connectivity now, but for those shared devices, that's when you potentially have to be a bit more careful, because other users are going to sit on that afterwards. If you've got a certain type of cookie on there, then potentially you could be left logged in. Now, a lot of those shared areas, they have sessions that shut down, and so, but potentially you need to be more careful, because you can't rely on that. Trade-off is worth it.
Richard, have you got any questions? You've been very patient online.
Yeah, there's no problem. Just trying to get the thing going a little bit. Just listening very intently. Maybe just if you could address a few of the specifics behind the score of the telecommunications vertical industry, really. Is there anything we can expand on there would be helpful for me?
So if we have a look at the ratings from the telcos, consumer sentiment is where they really struggle. So if you look at the ranking, they came in at 8 out of 11, and so that covered mobile, internet, home phone. So consumers did not rank them very high. If you look at what was on the websites and how they operate from a website perspective, again, they're 8 out of 11, so could do better. And then media sentiment was 9 out of 11. So I think there's a lot that the telecommunication industry can do to lift themselves through that ranking.
And do you think, Tommy, that telcos have gotten such a difficult rap, if you will, in terms of our analysis, because they've been doing what Gavin was talking about, trying to get to market fast with various offers? Or is there any particular reason you think that make it, difficult for telcos like it was in your answer to media? That you can think of particularly?
Look, I think telcos touch the consumer more than any other industry.
Yeah.
You are on your phone 24/7 virtually, and so the interactions with telcos are far greater than any other industry. They have been challenged because they use a lot of third parties in delivering their services. So they have got a very extended network that they've got to try and manage from a privacy and security perspective. So that's another challenge that they've got. And then if you think about the level of complexity that the telcos have, it's incredibly complex. So their systems don't always help them. And so you put all three of those together, and the customer experience is an area where they struggle.
Is that helpful, Richard?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask, just to follow up on Esther's question before, about the hotspots in airports. I mean, personally, I would say just use your phone or you get your own hotspot. But that made me then think of VPNs, which people have been talking about because of Netflix and those sorts of things. Which makes me then think, well, people use VPNs for privacy too. That's virtual private network. That's what VPN stands for. So did you measure that at all? If you didn't, can you do it for next year? And then another thing that would be good for next year was what are the privacy implications of wearables? Are there any? And can you measure it next time and let us know if people are being? I mean, obviously they're being tracked by their watches, but what are the privacy implications for that, etc., etc. And that might be something for next year if you haven't. That's not the Apple Watch yet. I'm still waiting.
That's what I was wondering.
Still waiting. I've ordered one. The black one.
Look, I think the first two is a no. We didn't look at that. Yes, I think that's a good area to look at for next year.
Yeah.
Wearables in general.
But that's very private.
It's
on your body.
And it links with apps, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of apps are going to come out to take advantage of wearables and make use of that information. But that information is up there. I mean, in terms of health and things like that, that's going to be some of that information that's potentially coming through. And the Privacy Act does have stronger requirements on sensitive data around health. So if you've got apps that are potentially using that information, it's all again stuck in that app. Now, whether they store that on your phone, whether they're taking that information, it's highly sensitive information. So I think it's a really interesting point that will evolve now that we've had the release of probably the most talked about wearable of recent times, the Apple Watch. But wearables in general, I think for the consumer is going to be very sensitive.
And I mean, is this an annual report?
This is the inaugural report.
Yeah, but I mean, will it be annual?
We certainly plan it to be annual.
If it's going to be annual, then in theory, by the time of the next one, if it's 12 months from now, we'll have Apple Watch 2 and Google Watch 2 and all the rest. So there'll be really a lot more.
So this is like baseline.
Yes, that's right. So we'll be able to compare results and we put in a formal methodology so that we can see how organisations are doing and how industries are improving.
Can I just ask each of you, what was the most shocking or surprising or most interesting finding for you? If I can ask, Marta, Gavin, and Tommy, what should be? I'll just ask, what was the most interesting finding?
For me personally, it was around social media. Social media gets mentioned in the media so negatively around almost anything. It could be around settings, it could be around policy changes. The thing that struck me when we were looking at some of the websites was that actually they perform quite well in terms of informing their consumers around exactly what they are doing, what they are collecting, how consumers can protect each piece of information that they provide on those websites. And I guess the other link to social media, the other thing that struck me was that they put the least third-party cookies on a consumer's device as well. So they're not using that many third parties to collect information for themselves.
Probably a positive and a negative. The negative is the lack of transparency that many industries have around the information they provide. The positive was that in terms of the most sensitive information that we've actually got and that's the credit card, passport and license. We're actually in a good situation where government and financial services are 1 and 2 in the list. So there's trust there, and that would be really bad if we didn't have that trust. So that for me is a real positive.
Mine would be the fact that more people trusted an organisation more when notified of a breach, and trusted it less. I think that was a really good sort of outcome from a positive perspective of this report and how hopefully organisations will potentially use that when they consider whether to notify about the breaches they may have in the future.